What's your main motivation for seeking a seat on the LCSD 1 Board of Trustees?
The main reason I'm decided to run is that over the last year especially, but the last couple of years since COVID, I think especially, the board, I think, has kind of gotten away from their primary goal, their primary job of trying to educate our kids. I think a lot of social issues have come in through pressure from the community. I do understand that, but I think we need to get back to our primary goal, which is education kids, student achievement, trying to make sure that we're educating all of the children within the district and that we're not funneling out some for special purposes.
Tell us a little bit about your background and why specifically you wanted to be a school board member other than what you just said.
I am an OBGYN physician. I've been here in Cheyenne for 24 years. I've delivered over 2,000 babies, I think probably closer to 2,500. Dr. Story and I have decided about 100 a year, and I've been here 24 years. And so, you know, children and education have always been very important to me, both through my education. I have two daughters that went through the public school system here in Cheyenne. And I was very involved, obviously, in their education while they were here. So I do have some experience with the district, although I'm not a specialist at all in any kind of education. But just having done that, I went through public education when I went through school. The kid's father also went through the Cheyenne public school system, and they are third generation in Cheyenne. And so the education of the community is super important. I really feel like the education of our kids in a community really is what makes our community strong. And if we don't educate them well, then we're not going to be able to have a strong, lasting community, because we need to educate citizens to become good citizens and productive citizens in our community.
If you're elected, how would you make sure that you're considering the needs of all of your constituents?
I think that's super important in our district, because we do have a wide variety of children. You know, we have from special education, where kids are both behavioral issues as well as educational issues, and then we have all the way through the AP and the IB programs within the district. And so it is quite a task to try and make sure all of those people are educated. I think we do a really good job in the district right now for special education, and I think we need to continue that. I think there are some issues about whether or not people are getting out of that special education, or they're being funneled into that system and staying there, and what is the main purpose of that and that type of thing. But I think we have to make sure that everyone in the district has the ability to have the same educational opportunities, whether that's special education, whether that's kids that are in some of the older schools that we have, because we have quite a few older schools that maybe didn't have air conditioning during this hot fall that we've had, things like that. So I think just trying to make sure that everyone across the district has the ability for the same education is super important.
What do you think the relationship should be between the school board and parents? What should that relationship look like?
Well, I would love if every parent in the district was involved in their kids' education. I think that's that's our responsibility as a parent, number one, and it also makes for better education. It makes for better schools. It makes for better kids' education. Some parents don't have that ability. Some parents don't have that bandwidth. Some kids are not necessarily living with their parents, and guardians may not always have the time for that. So there is a huge range of socioeconomic differences in our community, as well as a huge range of kids' abilities. And so we would love to have every parent to be involved, but that's not possible. So I think the parents who can be involved should be involved. I think they need to be involved in what their kids are doing in school. I think they need to be involved in what books their kids are reading. I think they need to be involved in helping their kids do extracurricular activities, which are super important for kids. So if we can get the more parent involvement, the better. And I think that's always a hard thing for schools to do, individual schools, because parents do get a little bit complacent and just say, okay, you go to school today, and don't deal with it very well. I'm hoping that the whole COVID experience helped because they realized how difficult it is to educate their kids. And so hopefully that will spur some parents into then becoming more involved.
So let me refocus to the question a little bit of the relationship between the school board and the parents. So there were some issues, as you mentioned early on, that were contentious during the last 2 or 3 years. What do you think that relationship should be between the board members, either individually or collectively, and parents attending meetings, or even that conversation outside of meetings?
It's a little bit more difficult with the board itself. I've had many years of collective experience on different boards, from the state level down through nonprofit level, and so boards. Each board acts in a different way, but the school board is more of a governmental type of a board, and the governance in that board is super important, and that's why we have it, but it does make it a little bit more separate from the individual parents. And so the school board's job is to run policy, and it's a higher level. So our only employee as the school board is the superintendent. The superintendent is then in charge of all of the other employees, and also responsible for implementing the policies that the board puts together. And so as a board, we are not in a position to be super responsive to individual parents. The mask mandate, I think, is a little bit of a different issue in that was a board decision on whether or not all the schools had to wear masks or not. So that particular issue was a little bit different than maybe some of the other issues that have been there. But in general, the board is not set up to be responsive to individual parents.
So kind of along similar lines, what should be the rules of engagement at school board meetings?
The school board meetings truly are just the business meetings for the board. Most of the work of the board is done in work sessions and other ways through all the different review of policies and the implementation of certain policies and those ideas. So the board meeting itself is an open meeting because it's a government meeting, and so it has to follow the rules for open meetings, and so definitely people can be there. Last night was a perfect example. They did some great presentations. So we had the Student of the Month presentation, which is always uplifting, and then the FFA and Ag students and sponsors came, and it's a great way to showcase different positive things that are going on in the board. But as far as parent interaction during the meeting and what the school board is doing at that time, there isn't a lot of ability for individual parents to influence that. I think if parents want to be involved, and they should want to be involved, I think they need to get involved through their schools, through those administrations. They need to get involved by contacting the board of trustees individually, maybe talking to them on an individual basis. The board is limited, again, because of governance, the board is limited. We can't have 3 or more of the board members together without it being considered a meeting. And so you can't have just little individual pockets. I did talk with Dr. Crespo when I met with her about how do we get more information out to parents, because that is a big issue. Transparency, people, if we're not talking to them individually, they think we're trying to hide something, and that's not what they're trying to do. It's just a more difficult thing because of this governmental board meeting policy. And so we talked about maybe having a couple of board members and Dr. Crespo going out and doing maybe some town hall meetings so that parents can ask questions and we can answer some questions on a little bit more personal level and things like that. So transparency is a big issue, It's just more difficult because of the system that's set up for the board.
Rene, I want to follow up just a little bit on these rules of engagement. There are certain policies that the board has, like 3 minutes for public
Yes.
input and registering to comment in advance. How do you feel about those rules? Are they appropriate or should they be changed?
I think, in our current environment, I think we have to have some kind of rules. Are those the exact rules we need to have? I don't know. I don't know that there's a perfect answer to that. But because there was so much contention for a period of time with those comments, I think there have to be some rules so that everyone is treated equally and one side of an issue doesn't feel like they're getting more time, more airplay, whatever they want to call it. And so there have to be some kind of rules that make it an equal playground.
Sounds good. Okay, moving on to a different topic. Do you think K-12 schools in Wyoming are adequately funded? And if not, how would you recommend the legislature address the issue?
Well, it is a constitutional requirement in Wyoming to fund all the schools equally and for every child to be able to have that equal opportunity for education that we talked about earlier. And right now, the legislature is not providing the funds recommended. There is an independent group of people who do assessments to see how much money should be given to each of the different districts, and that money is not being allocated as recommended. And it is a state legislative problem, unfortunately, so as a board member, we can't necessarily change that. We can advocate, and we can discuss, and we can try and talk to the legislators about that. I think, unfortunately, it's more of a voter thing that we have to start trying to get the voters in the state to vote in people who think education and funding education fully as recommended is an important thing.
Do you think LCSD 1 should join the Wyoming Education Association lawsuit over school funding?
Oh, that's so, very contentious. I actually do think we should. I think it is important. We have not. There are many things that have happened within the district over the last several years that show that the district has not been given the funds needed that are required by the state constitution. So I do think we have to stand up and say, we need this money in order to educate our children appropriately.
As a board member, what would be your budget priorities for the district?
That's difficult for me because I don't know enough about the budgetary constraints to be able to answer that fully. The things that we talked about already, special education and making sure that every student is able to get an equal opportunity for education should be our priority. I think student achievement should be our #1 priority, and everything we do beyond that, including budgetary, should be based on that. I just don't know the actual specifics at this point without having that education. But that includes teacher salaries because we need to have adequate teachers. We need to have the adequate number of teachers. Our classrooms right now are very overcrowded, both because of teacher shortages and because of building constraints. And so there are multiple things that are causing a problem that are causing the problem, leading to overcrowded conditions and inability to get more personalized education. And so I think once we set the goal for the student achievement, I think then using that as our budgetary priority is important.
This is directly related. How do you feel about teacher compensation? Based on what you know, do you think teachers are adequately compensated? Do they need raises in order to recruit teachers? Where are we at? And if you think that they need to be provided more, how would you go about doing that?
The more is the hard part. Are teachers adequately compensated currently? I think they're probably not. When I first moved to Cheyenne 24 years ago, teacher salaries in Cheyenne, in Wyoming, were very competitive, and we were able to attract teachers from other places because of that. Currently, we are not. We are below average for those communities surrounding us. And so it's much more difficult to attract teachers and to get them to stay. We're losing quite a few down to Colorado because they are offering higher salaries. And so I do think in order to recruit the good teachers that we already have, to keep that level going, we need to increase their salaries. Again, I don't know enough about the budgetary constraints to know how to go about that. I know it is also a priority for Superintendent Crespo, so we did talk about that in our meeting. We have fabulous teachers, and all of the teachers I know that in the district throughout are dedicated to their kids. They love their job. They work hard. They spend their own money. They spend tons of extra time. You know, we have great teachers who really feel very passionately about the kids in this district, and we need to be able to recruit that caliber of teacher going forward.
How much freedom should teachers have with regard to teaching the district's curriculum?
Again, another great question, you know, because that is one of the issues that has caused quite a bit of contention coming up. Again, we have great teachers. I think we have to trust that those teachers are going to teach what is appropriate within those standards. It's important for our children to be taught how to think, so not just rote learning, you know, not just, you know, standing up like we used to and doing the times tables up in front of everybody to learn, and not just learning dates and times of events in history. It's important that we teach them the critical thinking skills, because they're going to get out into this crazy world, and they're going to have to be able to figure out what is real and what's not real, and how to consider all those things. And so I think teaching our kids how to think is the most important, and we have to trust the teachers who have been educated on how to educate. We have to trust them to be able to do that.
Related to the curriculum, there are processes for approving and changing curriculum, and processes for parents to be involved.
Yes.
Where should parents be involved? And then later on, obviously many people are busy. They don't, as you mentioned, they have socioeconomic conditions that don't allow them to be as involved. Later on, they find out there's something they disagree with. What should be the process for voicing that?
And there is a process. I think it's important, you know, the school district has a huge, thick book of policies, and in that is how curriculum gets from the starting point all the way through approval through the board. And so there is an opportunity for parents to be involved in each of those steps. And so the more we can get parents, you know, this goes along with that, you know, how do we get information out to parents? You know, do we do town halls? Do we do email blasts? How do we get information out? And that's a problem we have with physicians too. You know, how does the hospital get information to us? So it's an ongoing problem everywhere, but how do we get information out to them? How do we get the parents involved? That is a great place to get parents involved, you know, from the beginning, because by the time all those steps have gone through, from parent involvement in what curriculum and what's important to them, to the teachers and how are you going to teach it, and what's the latest information, what's the scientific data showing us what the best way to teach is, and then it gets to the board. The board doesn't really have that much control over changing that curriculum. We can vote it down and say, no, we're not going to use that, but then you waste all of that information as it comes up to us. So once that curriculum is approved by all of the processes coming up and it gets to the board, it's much more difficult to change it from that point. So parents, we hope, will be involved early on. If a curriculum gets passed that parents don't agree with, then unfortunately it's on them to speak with individual teachers and administrators to try and figure out how they can massage it in a way that they feel comfortable with their child.
Related to that is the curriculum on teaching racial discrimination in U.S. history that's caused quite a bit of controversy. How do you feel about teaching racial discrimination? What should that look like in our K-12 schools?
We do not teach CRT in our schools. It's never been in the Laramie County School District. has the term socialized racism, in our communities. Has that come up? I'm sure it has. But as far as the actual definition of CRT, that particular idea is not being taught. It's a much higher level theory than we teach at our schools. Having said that, I do think we need to teach history as history is. It's important for our kids to know the good, the bad, the ugly, the fabulous about our country. That's what makes our country great. It's just like in Germany, for example, they have a requirement in the country that everyone that goes through school in Germany has to learn about the Holocaust, has to learn about Hitler and Nazism and the Holocaust, and is to prevent that from happening in the future. So that similar type of thing, we have to look at the bad things that happen along with the good things so that we prevent those things from happening in the future. So making sure history is taught as history happened, I think, is super important.
Do you support an opt-in or opt-out policy for kids checking out books, and why?
Absolutely an opt-out policy. I think the discussion that was had at the last work session for the board was super important. We had a majority of the trustees who agreed with the policy once they learned what the policy was, and I think that's a super important point, is that it's hard to decide about how to feel about a policy until you know what it is. And so once they learned all of the work that the librarians do, how they choose books, that all of these books that are on this watch list by the Moms of Liberty, all those books that have been chosen by the librarians have recommendations through national different organizations saying that those are books that we should be reading, our kids should be reading. They won awards, they have themes in them that are super important for teenagers, those types of things. So for one small group of parents to say, oh, we don't think anybody should be able to read this, is not appropriate. That's saying that those parents aren't paying attention. That's a little bit condescending. And so I think making sure that we trust our librarians, all the work they're doing, and trust the process that the school board has used for many years is important. And obviously, once the majority of the school board trustees learned what that process was, they felt comfortable with it.
Renee, what should the process be for changing policies? Part of what we're talking about here are long-standing policies that, as you said, the board's just getting to know, but maybe the public doesn't know. If a policy needs to be changed, do you agree with the way that we go about doing it now, or should that be different?
As far as I know right now, if a school board policy has to be changed, it really is changed within the school board, which is why school board elections are important, because we want to make sure that the majority of the people in the community are being represented, because those policies can be changed at the board. And they are actually right now looking at some different policies, and I don't necessarily agree with how they're changing them at the moment. So, it may be that we need a little bit more input from parents or other participants in the school board before those changes can just be made by the board. And so I think that is actually something we probably should look at, is our policy on how to do policies, because that can make a huge difference in the future.
What issues have we not touched on today that you wanted to make sure that we talked about?
I think we've talked about all of the ones that are the most important as far as our current climate. I guess I just want to say that, I'm hoping that in the future, maybe in 4 years, when this happens again, and 2 years, when people are running for the board again, that we can be more focused on the actual student achievement and how we go about that part of the educational process and not the social issues. We should hopefully not care whether somebody's black, brown, purple, blue, white, what they're wearing. We need to be educating the brain. And so hopefully we can get more towards that as the important part of the school board.
Obviously, you made the decision to run as an at-large member. Why that, and why not the area that you live in?
I think that's a little bit political in that my name, fortunately, is fairly well known in town. Again, I've been here for a long time, and a lot of people do know me as Dr. Hinkle. And so I felt that I had probably a little bit more name recognition for the at-large position than some other people might.
Sounds good. Anything else you want to share with us?
I think that covers it.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.